fellowship. So
and also New Zealand, the new student, she's on the road as well.
Oh, Meryl, yeah. But I don't think she doesn't know about the live streaming yet, but we'll let her know about that. So yeah, it's not because I'm so great or anything like that, believe me. It's because we want to try and join them in our fellowship together. Cool, all right. So we'll start with the Torah readings, and Ryan, I'll get you to come up first next. So if you could all stand, please, for the reading of the Torah.
Blessed Adonai, who is to be blessed.
Blessed is Adonai, who is to be blessed forever and ever.
Blessed are you, Adonai, Elohim, King of the universe, who chose us from among all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah.
Amen. Okay, so 26:1 through to that.
Parsha Ki Tavo, or when you come or when you enter. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God, Lord our God, that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us. The priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. You shall then recite as follows before the Lord your God. My father was a fugitive, Armenian. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O God, have given me. You shall leave it before the Lord your God and bow low before the Lord your God, and you shall enjoy together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. When you have set aside the full tenth part of your field in the third year, the year of the tithe, and have given it to the Levite and the stranger, the fatherless and the widow, that they may eat their fill in your settlements, you shall declare before the Lord your God, I have cleared out the consecrated portion from the house, and I have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, just as you commanded me. I have neither transgressed nor neglected any of your commandments. I have not eaten it while in mourning. I have not cleared out any of it while I was unclean, and I have not deposited any of it with the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done just as you commanded me. Look down from your holy abode, from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the soil you have given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as you swore to our fathers. The Lord your God commands you this day to observe these laws and rules. Observe them faithfully with all your heart and soul. You have affirmed this day that the Lord is your God, and you will walk in his ways. That you will walk in his ways, that you will observe his laws and commandments and rules, and that you will obey them, obey him. And the Lord has affirmed this day that you are, as he promised you, his treasured people who shall observe all his commandments, and that he will set you in fame and renown and glory, high above all the nations that he had made, and that you shall be, as he promised, a holy people to the Lord your God. Blessed are you, Adonai, Elohim, King of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and implanted eternal life within us. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. Hashem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.
Amen.
Blessed Adonai is to be blessed.
Blessed is Adonai, who is to be blessed forever and ever.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe, who chose us from among all the peoples, and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah.
Amen.
These are the same terms of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to conclude with the Israelites in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant which he had made with them at Horeb. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, You have seen all that the Lord did before your very eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his quarters, and to the whole country. The wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels. Yet to this day the Lord has not given you a mind to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. I lead you through the wilderness 40 years. The clothes on your back did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You had no bread to eat, and no wine or other intoxicants to drink, that you might know that I am Lord your God. When you reached this place, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan came out to engage us in battle, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it to the Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribes of Manasseh as their heritage. Therefore observe faithfully all the terms of this covenant, that you may succeed in all that you undertake. Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and implanted eternal life within us. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah, B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated for the reading of the Haftarah. Right.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe, who chose good prophets and was pleased with their words, which were spoken in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai, who chooses the Torah of Moses, his servant and Israel, his people and the prophets of truth and righteousness.
Amen.
Arise, shine, for your light has dawned. The presence of the Lord has shone upon you. Behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick clouds the peoples. But upon you the Lord will shine, and his presence will be seen over you. And the nations shall walk by your light, kings by your shining radiance. Raise your eyes and look about. They have all gathered and come to you. Your sons shall be brought from afar, your daughters like babes on shoulders. As you behold, you will glow. Your heart will throb and thrill, for the wealth of the sea shall pass on to you. The riches of the nations shall flow to you. Dust clouds of camels shall cover you. Dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, they shall all come from Sheba. They shall bear gold and frankincense, and shall herald the glories of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be assembled for you. The rams of Nebaioth shall serve your needs. They shall be welcome. Shall be welcome offerings on my altar, and I will add glory to my glorious house. Who are these that float like a cloud, like doves to their coats? Behold, the coastlands await me, with ships of Tarshish in the lead, to bring your sons from afar, and their silver and gold as well. For the name of the Lord your God, for the Holy One of Israel who has glorified you. Aliens shall rebuild your walls. Their kings shall wait upon you. For in anger I struck you down, but in favour I take you back. Your gates shall always stay open. Shall know, day and night they shall never be shut, to let in the wealth of the nations, with their kings in procession. For the nation or the kingdom that does not serve you shall perish. Such nations shall be destroyed. The majesty of Lebanon shall come to you, cypress and pine and box, to adorn the site of my sanctuary, to glorify the place where my feet rest. Bowing before you shall come the children of those who tormented you. Prostrate at the soles of your feet shall be all those who reviled you. And you shall be called City of the Lord, Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Whereas you have been forsaken, rejected, with none passing through, I will make you a pride everlasting, a joy for age after age. You shall suck the milk of the nations, suckle at royal breasts. And you shall know that I, the Lord, am your Saviour. I, the mighty one of Jacob, am your Redeemer. Instead of copper, I will bring you gold. Instead of iron, I will bring you silver. Instead of wood, copper. And instead of stone, iron. And I will appoint well-being as your government, prosperity as your officials. The cry violence shall no more be heard in your land, nor wrack and ruin within your borders. And you shall name your walls victory, and your gates renown. No longer shall you need the sun for light by day, nor the shining of the moon for radiance by night. For the Lord shall be your light everlasting. Your God shall be your glory. Your sun shall set no more, your moon no more withdraw. For the Lord shall be a light to you forever, and your days of mourning shall be ended. And your people, all of them righteous, shall possess the land for all time. They are the shoot that I planted, my handiwork in which I glory. The smallest shall become clean, the least a mighty nation. I, the Lord, will speed it in due time. Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe, Rock of all worlds, righteous in all generations, the Almighty, the faithful one, who says and does, who speaks and fulfills. For all his words are true and righteous. For the Torah, for the worship, for the prophets, and for the Shabbat day you gave us, Adonai, our Elohim, for rest, for honour, for everything, Adonai, our Elohim. We thank you and bless your name from all living forever and ever. Blessed are you, Adonai, for the holiness of the Shabbat. Be Hashem, Yeshua, HaMashiach. Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe, who gave us Mashiach Yeshua and the commandments of the renewed covenant. Blessed are you, Yeshua, giver of the renewed covenant.
Amen.
From Matthew, he went out from Nazareth and came to live in Kepha-Nahum, which is on the seashore of the border of Zebulun and Naphtali, fulfilling what he said by Yeshua the prophet. the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people walking in darkness saw a great light. To those dwelling in the land of the shadow of death, light dawned upon them. From this time on, Israel began calling out to proclaim and say, Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is on the brink of our arrival. While he was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw that two men who were brothers, Simeon, who was called Petros, and his brother Andrew, were casting their net into the sea because they were fishermen. He said to them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of people. So they quickly left their nets behind and followed him. When he moved on from there, he saw two other men who were brothers, Yaakov ben Zebediah and his brother Yochanan, in a boat that their fathers mending their nets, and he called to them. They quickly left the boat and their father behind and followed him. Then Yeshua, travelling around in all of the Galilee, he taught in their synagogues, he proclaimed the good news of the kingdom, and he healed every sickness and every disease among the people. It is now went out in all the lands of Syria, and they brought to him all the sick people, those afflicted with any illness or painful condition, those in the grip of demons, those struck by the moon, and those who were paralyzed, and he healed them. Blessed are you, Adonai, our Elohim, King of the universe, who gave us the word of truth and everlasting life in our midst. Blessed are you, Adonai, Yeshua HaMashiach, giver of the renewed covenant. Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.
Amen.
I just love the word of the Lord. It's just inspiring and powerful and rich and full of promises. Talking about the word of God, it is a tree of life for those who grasp it, and those who support it are blessed. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peaceful. Return us to you, Adonai, so that we shall renew our days as of old.
Amen.
Let's pray the blessing of the Torah study together.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments, and has commanded us to be occupied in the study of the words of the Torah. Please, Lord our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths, in the mouths of your people, the house of Israel, so that we, our descendants, their descendants, and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, may all know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Lord, who teaches Torah to his people in Israel. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has chosen us from all peoples and given us his Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of Torah.
I love the way that we as... Do you want to turn that top light on the next screen, just to give a bit of light to the screen? Sorry. I love the way that we as Westerners and Gentiles read that really nice and, deliberate and slow. If a Jew was reading it, he'd finish twice as fast as we would. And we'd still be looking at the second word going, what's that word mean? But we're not going to be like that. We're happy with the culture we've got.
Yeah. I need to meditate on what I say.
Exactly, me too. I'm always the last one to finish the Shahari prayers in the morning, so it's like I walk back, I turn around, everybody's finished, twiddling their thumbs. Alright, this Parsha starts with the concept of having entered the land, the promised land that God had promised the nation of Israel, that had promised Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. The sages discuss what it means to enter the land. Does it mean as soon as 1 foot is in the land? Does it mean when they're 50% in the land, so when half the body is that actually entered? Or is it when they're fully in the land?
I love the ways they're so pedantic.
They have to be. Well, the verse continues in our Parsha reading and says, you possess it and live in it. So according to the Parsha reading, it actually means they have to be fully in it, and in fact they have to be living and have planted something for the first fruits to have been brought forward. So it's really very obvious. I don't know why the sages actually worry about these sort of concepts, but I just thought I'd throw that out at you to just give you an idea of what the sages actually look at when they're looking at the Parsha readings. You know, they pull it apart and then they find something and they go, oh, this links with that, links with that. This time they didn't, unfortunately. At least I didn't follow it through. I just thought the answer was quite obvious. This would have been a foreign concept to the people of Israel, since they were born in slavery, most of them, because remember the 40 years in the wilderness, so anybody who was younger than 40, they would have been born in, anybody who was older than 40 would have been born in slavery, and anybody who was younger would have been born in the desert. So they didn't really know what it meant to till the ground and actually develop your own fruit and crop and do everything like that. So it's quite interesting, quite a challenging concept to consider actually when you think you've got a life of everything's given to you from heaven, your clothes didn't wear out. Now suddenly you've got to fend for yourself again.
Yeah.
So it's a whole change of, you know, we always think, oh, God's going to provide everything for me like He did in the wilderness, but they actually had to work. Once they got into the promised land, it was work. God will bless you, but you still had to work. It was you doing your part in it as well. So they didn't have a crop to give straight away, because it says they had to bring their first fruits from the crop. So they would have had to sow the seed first and let the crop come up, and then they would have understood what the first fruits was all about. The first fruit that the Lord was asking him to give was an expression of gratitude for their redemption. Verses 5 to 7 of chapter 26, we see that to bring the offering, they are to summarise the redemption story from Egypt. And Ryan read that through for us this morning. You know, it talked about we were slaves and you took us out. And it goes through the whole story. So that's what they were meant to do when they brought the first fruits to the priest. They had to go through that little bit of spiel. I wanted to look a bit further into the first fruits offering in a minute though, but first I want to look at a picture that we see here in this, I suppose, giving thanks of having a redemption and how that relates to the final redemption, which is coming up 2,000 years apart. When the Lord will finally bring his people back into the land fully, a bit like he did the first time round, and we'll probably be joining them, I hope. I hope to be on the what was it, the caravans or the ships that were being sailed into Israel, into the land. I think I was talking about the Jewish people, but we grafted in, so I'm hoping to be there as well. But when that actually happens, this is what it says in Jeremiah 16:14 to 15. So they're not going to, once they get into the land, they're not going to say anymore, thanks for the redemption from Egypt and all of that. This is what the Lord says they will say in Jeremiah 16:15 to 14 to 15. Therefore, says Adonai, the day will come when people will no longer swear, as Adonai lives, who brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but as Adonai lives, who brought the people of Israel out of the land of the north and out of the south, out of all the countries he drove them. For I will bring them back into their own land, which I gave to their ancestors. So they're going to replace that little thanksgiving of thanks for taking us out of Egypt with thanks for bringing us out of all the nations. Thanks for redeeming us and bringing us back and gathering us in. On Tuesday night, Marie and I and Lynn and also Phil, for those, some of you might know Phil, he comes here every now and then, goes to backyard and he travels around quite a bit, so he's up at Mount Tamarine today. We were at a fundraising dinner for Karen Hayaso, and there was around 200 people there. That's where we saw Brett and Lynn and a few others that we know, Pastor Greg Cummings and a few people like that. It was a bit down on numbers from last year, about 20 people less than last year, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world, because the whole thing is people's hearts are being changed. So there was new people there than there were last year, and there was the same ones there from last year that have really sowing into this ministry. But what's happening through Karen Hayeside, if you're not familiar with what they're doing, they're a government arm of the Israeli government that's fundraising to bring the Jewish people back to the land to do Aliyah. And this is all working towards fulfilling part of the prophecy we read in Isaiah this morning, where it talks about, that your sons will be brought, your daughters will be carried, and they'll be coming on ships. And also Isaiah 49:22, where we see Adonai Elohim answers, I am beckoning to the nations, raising my banner to the peoples. They will bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters on their shoulders. So we all know that this is a prophecy that is being fulfilled right now, but it's only a part, it's only a picture of the prophecy of the end times, of the redemption. Why do I talk about the redemption? Because we're talking about the redemption being a picture that we saw in Deuteronomy, where Israel went in for the first time and gave thanks. They were redeemed from Egypt. This time round, it'll be Israel and those who are grafted in will be redeemed again into the land. You can say, well, is it all Messiah going to be doing this, or is it all us going to do it? Well, it's a combination, as we see from the prophetic passages. The nations will bring the Israeli people back in, but also Messiah, when he comes, he will gather the rest. So we are not all going to come in this first lot where the nations are fulfilling prophecy. We will come, I think, we will come in the second lot when Messiah returns, and with the twinkle of an eye, we'll meet him in the air and then go to Jerusalem. I know there's still some thinking that we might go to heaven or disappear somewhere else, but this is my theology, and I'm sticking with it. But there's another part of the picture that has to happen to see this end time redemption fulfilled. And that's what we're going to be involved in tonight in the worldwide Shacharit prayer. This is probably a first that this has ever happened, that Messianic believers around the world are gathering together, united, going through. It won't be the same prayer siddur, but our prayer siddur that we've got is the main one that we'll be following. It's pretty much Orthodox Jewish prayer siddur. The only thing that makes it really Messianic, or for those who believe in Yeshua, is all the footnotes down the bottom that explain how the prayers actually relate to Yeshua the Messiah. But generally, we will be praying Orthodox Jewish prayers tonight. Over 700 people. We reached 700 this morning, and with whoever is in this room, because I've only registered as one person, we'll have 700 plus whoever is in this room praying with us. More, someone Mauritius will be praying, Kim will be down at home praying. So there'll be 700 plus.
Wow.
So there's at least 14 people from Australia registered and 9 people from New Zealand registered. So that to me is another fulfillment of prophecy. When we start to, as Gentile believers, start to pray in unity with the Jewish people, the Shacharit prayer. And that to me is another sign of the redemption coming. I think we spoke last night about how do we make the Jews jealous, and it's a big question, because we know that doing the Torah, doing the mitzvahs, we're not going to do it better than the Jews, so we're not going to make them jealous that way. I really believe it's when we unite with them and we look forward to Messiah coming, the Jewish Messiah coming, not the Christian Messiah. The Christian Messiah doesn't look like a Jewish Messiah at all. So they wouldn't understand a Christian Messiah, but they'll understand a Jewish Messiah. And when we are longing and calling out for the Jewish Messiah to come, they will be scratching their heads and going, why are these Gentiles calling for the Jewish Messiah? That will make them jealous. So I'm looking forward to what's going to happen in the next couple of years. I'm not saying that this is correct, but I heard a rumour that one of the Messianic leaders in Messianic Fellowship said that Messiah's coming back in 2026. He had 6 or 7 proofs from Scripture and from other Messianic or Jewish writings that now it's going to be great if he does come back in 2026. I can't see that happening. But who knows what tonight's prayer will change in the events of history. So I'm not going to say no, and I'm not going to say yes. I'm not going to put a date on it, but we'll see. So enough of the redemption, because we talk about that every week. We talk about Messiah. I want to talk about something a bit more practical today, tithing, first fruits. The whole concept of bringing your first fruits to the place where the Lord God chose his name to be placed is gratitude. It's all about gratitude. No other reason. Gratitude for his redemption, gratitude for setting his people free from slavery, whether from slavery in Egypt or whether from slavery of sin. Bringing us into the promised land that God had promised, whether it be the physical land or whether it be into that new relationship with Hashem. Those are the promises he's given us. In the days of the temple, farmers in the land would look around the field and see the produce and see what was the first blossom, first to ripen from their produce, and they would go out and mark that with a ribbon around the stem, so they knew that this was the first fruit. When the fruit matured, whether it be harvest or something like that, they would take that in a basket to the temple in Jerusalem and offer that as an offering, as their first fruits. This was the first thing that produced on my field, on my tree, whatever it was. And typically that was around the time of Shavuot, but we'll see later on it also extended through to the time of Sukkot. So there was also some offerings at Sukkot, which were sort of first fruit offerings. One presenting the first fruits to the priest would recite, as we were talked about, Deuteronomy 26, 5 to 11. This reminded the farmer that the land belonged to God. In fact, everything belonged to God. And they were just giving back to him what he asked for. Just that first fruit, and of course the tithing as well. But we'll talk about the tithe a bit later on. By returning the very first portion of this bounty to the Lord, he showed his gratitude for the Lord's provision and blessing. And the same principles applies to the commandment of the firstborn. That was the whole thing of the firstborn, was to give thanks that the firstborn weren't killed like the firstborn in Egypt were killed. But instead, you don't bring the firstborn as an offering. What you actually did, you brought a redemption payment for them. But the Levites were set aside as the firstborn instead. They would become the priests. So all of our firstborn should be set aside to be priests, but instead the Levites would. When I say ours, the Jewish firstborns. So the commandment of first fruits actually only applied to the people living in the land. It was a crop in the land, not outside the land. And it had to be brought to the temple. So once the temple was destroyed, the first fruits offering doesn't apply to anymore. The Levitical priesthood was also gone once the temple was destroyed, and so you couldn't have a priest to bring it to anymore. So it didn't look too good for the Jewish people when all these things happened. It still doesn't look good for them now when it comes to a first fruit offering, except they're in the land, but still there's no temple and no priesthood. So, having said that, all the teaching that I've ever done about bringing your first fruits to the pastor, when you first get your paycheck and you take your first fruits, I'm sorry, it was wrong. And all those who teach it now, I'm afraid they're wrong. We cannot bring a first fruit to our pastor because they're not the priest, there's no temple, it's not in Jerusalem, or in Israel, in the land. So the first fruits is not an applicable amount of offering that we give these days. So, but please hear what I'm not saying, or please don't hear what I'm not saying. Does that make sense? There's nothing wrong with being generous, okay? So I'm not saying be stingy and don't give. I'm saying if someone's telling you to give a first fruit, it's not a first fruit. You can be generous and give an offering if you want, or tithe, and we'll talk about tithe in a minute. but it's nothing to do with being scriptural in terms of your first fruits. So I've repented of that. I've confessed it this morning, I repent, and I'll never teach that again. Until we get to the land and there's a temple and a priesthood. So, for those who are new here or haven't only been with us for a couple of months, we don't talk about tithes and offerings here apart from maybe once a year. So, for those who are new, I'm sorry, this is the once a year that I'm talking about. And we don't talk about it in terms of trying to coerce people to give money. What we actually do is we try and teach responsible management of finances, biblical style, right? So, however else you manage the balance of your money, I can't help you with that because I'm not that good at it myself. But in terms of how you are meant to handle your finances scripturally, that's what we want to talk about. So, a disclaimer. We are not obligated to the commandments of Torah. We are not Jewish. These commandments apply to Jews. We can partake in them, but we are not obligated to. So everything I'm going to say from here on is like a free will. It's a gratitude. It's something that you may want to do, but I'm not saying you have to do this to fulfill Torah, because we're not obligated to yet. And I'll get to that. Got something else?
It's always a but.
So as I said, we're not Jewish. It's not commanded for us to do. We're not obligated. There's no temple anyway, and there's no Levitical priesthood. And for the first fruits, we're not in the land. So there's lots of things going against this message right now. Okay, I'm not going to get any money out of you based on all of those negatives. No. Also, the other thing, offerings, I'm not going to talk about. Offerings are something different again to tithes, and free will love offerings are different again. Offerings are described in Leviticus, and they cover a lot of things like thanksgiving offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering, and we talked about guilt offering last week. You know, if you weren't sure whether you've sinned or not, you would bring, what was the a Tului offering, which was like a hanging in the balance offering. I'm not sure if I've sinned, I better bring some offering just to cover myself. That was a good Tului offering. And the Tului meant the hung one, which is talking about Yeshua hanging on the tree. So if you missed last week, I'm sorry, we'll get it again in 11 months and
It's also on YouTube.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we recorded, yeah. So.
Yeah, we recorded, but I take them off once I...
Oh,
yeah.
okay, so it's not on YouTube.
No, it's not on anymore. You have to come next year. A free will love offering is something that you're led to give by the Ruach. Okay, it's not a prescribed certain amount, it's whatever's put on your heart at the time. It's all about being a generous person, about living a generous lifestyle. And as we spoke about last night, the Messianic way is a generous way. Okay, if you consider yourself a Messianic believer, then generosity should pour out of you and me, because that's part of it. And another name for it is Hasidic, Hasidut, which means generous, loving, expecting Messiah, giving. That little prayer that we say at the end of the Ten Commandments, I hereby fulfill. Sorry.
I hereby take upon myself.
I hereby take upon myself to fulfill the mitzvah to love your fellow man as yourself. That is not in the Jewish prayer sitter, but that is in the Chabad prayer sitter, in the Hasidic prayer sitter. So they look beyond just the Ten Commandments. They go, reaching out to our brother and sister. So when I say Hasidic, we are not part of Chabad, just to make clear that up. We are not part of the Hasidic movement, but ours is a Hasidic movement by nature. It's Messianic, it's Hasidic,
Hopefully it's joyful.
it's generosity, it's joyful. So, just clearing that up, now let's talk about tithing. So, yeah, all of that in this little section here. Tithing. Commandments around tithing are mentioned in Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. In summary, the tithing system was organised in a 7-year cycle, the Shemitah cycle, in which yearly tithes were broken off and in every third and sixth of the cycle, and I'll go through this again if you want to take notes, but in every third and sixth year of the cycle, the second tithe is replaced with a poor man's tithe. So I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. These tithes were actually more like a tax for the people of Israel at the time. They were mandatory and not an optional giving. The tithes were distributed locally within the gates, according to Deuteronomy 14:28, and they were to support the Levites, who we know didn't have any property, any source of income, and the poor, who also didn't have any source of income. Every year the Bikurim, which is the first fruits, the Terumah, which is the first part, slightly different to the first fruits, also called the heave offering, the Maaser Rishon, which is the first tithe, and the Terumat Maaser, which is the tithe of the tithe. So when you tithe to the Levites, they would tithe to the Cohen. So the Cohen would get a tenth of what you brought in.
The high priest?
The high priest. Yeah, sorry, the Cohen over there. So initially the commandment, not too far. These were separated from the grain, wine and oil that was produce of the land at the time. Initially the commandment to separate this from one's own produce only applied when the entire nation of Israel was in the land. So as we said before, remember, when is it that you've entered the land? Not just you, but when the whole nation was settled in the land. So the problem was, when the people went out in exile into Babylon, this didn't apply anymore, scripturally. So the rabbis sort of came together and said, what shall we do about this? And they actually made this, not the rabbis, those that were returning from Babylonian exile. They knew there was still some there, but some had returned, and the ones that returned actually said, hey, you know what? We're going to make this an obligation. There was no obligation to tithe at the time, but they said, we want to make this obligatory upon ourselves. And so they voluntarily bound themselves to giving these tithes again, even though all of Israel was not in the land. So we sometimes say that Judaism is very legalistic and really stuck in an old mind frame, but we were talking about this last night again, that they adapted the things they did in Torah to the circumstance at the time. So even though there were still people outside the land, they said, no, we're going to adapt this tithing that we don't have to do. We're going to make it, we're going to make it an obligation. We do want to tithe. We do want to support the Levites. We do want to bring money to the temple. So it's not just a system that was stuck in 2,000 years BC and nothing ever changed. They made it change to suit their lifestyle. It stayed within a framework. So the first fruits, which is the Bikurim, the major obligation was to bring first fruits to the temple, and it began at the festival of Shavuot. So that was actually what Shavuot was about. We think it's all about the giving of the Spirit. Well, that only happened really at the book of Acts, Pentecost. But before that, it was all about bringing in the first fruits. And before that, it was all about giving the Torah. So the Torah was given at Shavuot. First fruits were given as a thanksgiving, and then the Ruach was poured out. And the first fruit giving was still continued. It wasn't stopped because of that. But the first fruits was limited to the 7 agricultural products: wheat, barley, grapes in the form of wine, figs, pomegranates, olives in the form of oil, and dates, all grown in Israel. So this tithe and the associated festival of Shavuot is legislated in the Torah, Exodus 23, Leviticus 23, and Deuteronomy 26. The next one is the Terumah, which is called the first part. I used to call it the first fruit as well, but it's actually not the first fruit, it's the first part. It's a little bit different. Before the tithe or offering is even given, so before the first fruits, first comes the first fruits, which is given on Shavuot. Before that's taken out, then, before everything else is taken out, comes the Terumah. And this is similar to a first fruit offering. It was the first obligation that was incumbent upon an Israelite or a Jew. It means to separate from the harvest grain, wheat, barley or spelt, so it wasn't the same produce, it was something slightly different, or wine, or oil, the 1/50th portion of the produce, so 1/50th only. If a person was generous, they would set aside 1/40th, which is a little bit more, or if they were stingy, they would set aside 1/60th. So they were allowed between 1/40th and 1/60th. So you knew how generous the person was by how much they brought during their Terumah. And by the way, you know that expression, the mean eye. If you have a mean eye, evil eye, it means you would give 1/60th. But if you had a good eye, you would bring 1/40th. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was all about whether you were generous or not. The Terumah would be given to the Cohen, who in turn would eat such fruits in the state of ritual cleanness in accordance to Leviticus 22:6. This obligation continued until the fact that such fruits grew. This obligation was contingent upon the fact that such first fruits grew in the land of Israel. Later, the rabbis made it an obligation to do the same for all fruits and vegetables grown in the land. Not only just those ones that were mentioned before of grain, grapes and olives. However, with the destruction of the temple, the cessation of ritual purity, so the priests could no longer be ritually pure because the temple was destroyed, the obligation to separate the Terumah continued unabated, although it was no longer given to the priests, to the Aaronic lineage. It was because they were defiled now, they could no longer accept it. The general practice was to actually separate the Terumah and destroy it immediately, to bury it or some other means of disposal, which is a little bit of a waste from what I can see, but that's what they did.
The same as when you're making the challah.
The challah, yeah. So we're supposed to burn the first fruit or the Terumah of the challah, the portion, yeah. So tithing. Tithing was actually broken up into a number of different things, as we saw in the summary, and it was according to the Shemitah year, the 7-year cycle. The first tithe is a giving of 1/10 of what remains. So you've taken your first fruits away, you've taken your Terumah away, and then whatever's left, you take 1/10 of that. And historically, during the first temple period, this first tithe was given to the Levites. Around the time of the start of the second temple, Ezra and his Beit Din implemented this giving to the Kohanim, the priests. So there was a slight change there when Ezra sort of headed up the Sanhedrin, or the men of the Great Assembly, I should say. The Levites did not own or inherit any property, like we mentioned before, and Lynn also mentioned that last week. Their function was purely to do temple worship, temple functions, to teach, and they were civil servants. They were the lawmakers, remember them, or the law keepers, or the judges. So they had plenty of other things to do besides going out and trying to plough the land and make a produce for themselves. So that went to the Levites, the first tithe. The goods donated from other Israelite tribes were the source of their sustenance. So that's the first tithe. The second tithe, what does that mean? Unlike other offerings, which were restricted to the consumption within the tabernacle, the second tithe could be consumed anywhere within the walls of Jerusalem. So on years 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the Shemitah cycle, God commanded the children of Israel to take a second tithe that was to be brought to the place of the temple. And you actually were meant to eat it there together with the priests. It was part of like a fellowship meal.
Like a celebration, yeah.
Like a celebration. And if you lived too far away and you couldn't take all your fruit there, you would your fruits and your tithes of that, you would just sell it, take the money to the temple, buy something. And you know, we always make this big thing about Yeshua came and whipped the temple, the money traders in the temple, and they shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
They actually were allowed to do that. It was the ones who were dishonest that he was chasing out of the temple.
Yeah,
So there's nothing wrong with what they were doing in terms of selling back the produce for the sacrifices, for the offerings. What they were doing, they had unequal measures. They were cheating. And they're the ones that Yeshua was driving out, not the honest ones. That was just an aside, by the way. So the Bible required the owner of the redeemed coins, as I spoke about, to buy whatever you like, cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wished. And you had to celebrate it there. You had to be in Israel, in Jerusalem, and celebrate, eat the food, drink the wine, share it with the priests, with the Levites. So that was how you were meant to do the first, second, was it? First, second, fourth, and fifth year of the Shemitah cycle. The third and the sixth year of the Shemitah cycle was supposed to go to the poor. It was called the poor man's tithe. It was given to the strangers, the orphans, or the widows. So, back to our Parsha reading. I've just taken you to a whole number of other Parsha readings, and I've put that together. And I sort of did that study, put it together, and then I thought, well, maybe I should look at this Parsha reading commentary and just see what Rashi says. Well, lo and behold, here's what Rashi says. Exactly the same. His commentary. Well, not exactly the same. So his commentary on Deuteronomy 26:13, where it says, "You are to say in the presence of Adonai your God, I have rid my house of the things set aside for God, and given them to the Levite, the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, in keeping with every one of the mitzvah you gave me. I haven't disobeyed any of your mitzvah or forgotten them." Rashi comments this. He says, from here, on the basis of this verse, it says, "We do not give a poor person who comes for his tithe at the threshing floor less than half a cup of wheat." So he's specifying how much we should give a poor person. And then he says, it's back a bit. This refers to a year in which there applies only one tithe, of the two tithes that applied to the year which preceded it. For in the first and the second year of the Shemitah cycle, the first tithe, that which is to be given to the Levites, applies as it says, "When you take the children of Israel, the tithe." And the second tithe, which is eaten in the Jerusalem by the owner of the food, also applies, "And you shall eat before Hashem your God, the tithe of your grain and your oil." There you have two tithes. And the third tithe, to those two tithes, only one applies. And which one is this? The first tithe. Then he talks about, "And instead of the second tithe, you should give the tithe to the poor," where it says, "And you shall give, and you will have given to the Levite that which is his." There you have the first tithe. When the verse says to convert the orphan or to the widow, this is the poor man's tithe. So he was actually breaking it down in a lot less words than what I did, what I was actually put on my heart to share about that verse. So what I'm trying to say is I wasn't too far off track when I actually put all this together, not realising that Rashi was doing a similar commentary on this whole section. So it's interesting how that works sometimes. The question is, how do we tithe today? That's all well and good for 2,000 years ago, when they had a temple and all this was happening. But we're not in the land, we have no temple, we're not farmers, or most of us here aren't. So I wanted to point out something that is in the Didache. So has anybody come across the Didache before? Yeah.
We have.
Yeah, so it's,
We didn't study on it last year.
it's also called the Lord's teaching. That's it. Well, this is more than the Didache.
This is a commentary.
This is a commentary on the Didache, so it's definitely a worthwhile book to get. And it's called The Lord's Teaching to the Gentiles by the 12 Apostles. So when I asked how does it apply to us today, well, this is the first way it applies to us. We're not Jews, but we're Gentiles, so there may be some instructions here that will help us in this. In fact, there is chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. I've got them there, so you can actually see. Now, the version I'm reading is slightly different because every translation is also an interpretation. It's originally written in Greek, and so here you'll actually see the word used, first fruit. You'll notice I'm going to use first part because the original Greek word wasn't the same as first fruit. It actually meant first part. But it says, every true prophet who wants to live among you is entitled to his sustenance. Likewise, a teacher is also entitled, just as a worker is entitled to his sustenance. Therefore, you shall take every first part of the produce of your winepress and threshing floor, and both cattle and sheep, and give it to the prophets, because they are your high priests. Interesting. But if you do not have a prophet, give it to the poor. When you make a batch of bread dough, take the first part, which is the challah that you're talking about, and give it according to the commandment. Likewise, when you open a vessel of wine or oil, take the first part and give it to the prophets. Also of money and clothing and any other possession, take the first part as it seems fitting to you, and give it according to the commandment. So this is some instructions to the Gentiles, not the Jews.
What was the explanation of a prophet again?
Well,
Description, beg your pardon.
yeah.
I think it was one of the 12, or an apostle.
He was one of the apostles or prophets, but first fruits actually say that it applies to both a prophet and a teacher. But I would actually go a little bit further and say it applies to, because prophet, teacher, apostle, they were all ministry giftings. They're not ministry titles, or hi, I'm Prophet Ralph. They're job descriptions, exactly. So those things were usually given out to everybody, but typically it was the leader, the elder, the bishop, or the deacon that was operating in those gifts that would actually move around from fellowship to fellowship, and they're the ones that are talking about those leaders that have those ministries of teaching or prophecy or whatever.
It's like itinerant teachers.
A bit like itinerant teachers, but also for their own local people.
So that's not too far out from what was happening at the time with the itinerant rabbis. People were encouraged to give them food and shelter because they just didn't have any other trade, or they were taking time off to teach the far out villages.
Yeah. Although the rabbis didn't all not have trades, like Rav Shaul. Yeah.
But when they did go on hiatus
they put their trade on hold.
Yeah.
When they were right.
The course that I did last year on the sages who wrote the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud, Rabbi Bernstein taught that most of them actually worked. Most of the rabbis worked for a living, and they just did their rabbinical teaching as a sideline, a bit like Rav Shaul. He was a tent maker, and he said that somewhere in the last 500,000 years, I can't remember exactly where, one of the rabbis was asked to teach so much that he had to take time off his work, And that's when it started to happen that they were asking for money for being a rabbi, so to speak. Before that, most rabbis would just get some offering like a terumah, which is how much? Terumah is, if you're generous,
It's 60.
1/40th. If you're stingy, it's 1/60th. So that's the sort of thing they would get as an itinerant ministry from the people that they were ministering to. So that's what first fruits, the authors, or the commentators on this are saying what the first fruits is. They're actually saying it's the first part. It doesn't fall into a tithing, so they weren't giving tithes. They weren't giving the first fruits because first fruits had to be in the land, the fruit of the land. The tithe is not something. In the last verse it says, "Take the first part as it seems fitting to you," which means you decide whether you want to make it a 40th or a 60th. A tithe is actually, you can't do what seems fitting to you. A tithe is 10%. It's not more, not less. So first fruits are saying that it was actually the terumah, the terumah being somewhere between 1.7 and 2%, or if you're really generous, 2.5% of your income, which is not really much at the end of the day when you think about it. It's quite little. So, question is, will this apply in the future? Tithes and offerings and all that. So, as Messianics, who most of us has come out of some sort of church background, if you're a Pentecostal background, you would hear a tithing message every week, which would often go longer than the message from the Word, right?
There was music to it and everything.
When we come out of that, we go, phew, we've been set free from this, and we're going to hold on to our money because no one is actually going to talk me out of my money anymore, okay? That's why before you go to church, you actually should set in your heart what you're going to give before you go, so you don't get emotionally wound up with the message, okay? So none of you are emotionally wound up with this, are you? No? Good. So we've convinced ourselves that we're free from this and we don't have to give tithes or offerings at all.
I can hear it on the wind.
Let's have a look what Zechariah 14:16 to 19 says. If someone would like to read that. And if someone else could please get Isaiah 56, 6 to 8.
Zechariah.
One's got Zechariah, Marie's got Zechariah, thanks.
Yeah. 16 through to
19.
19. Finally, everyone remaining from all the nations that came to attack Jerusalem will go up every year to worship the King. What? Adonai Sabaoth. And to keep the festival of Sukkot. If any of the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship King Adonai Sabaoth, no rain will fall on them. If the family of Egypt doesn't go up, if they refuse to come, they will have no annual overflow from the Nile. Moreover, there will be the plague with which Adonai will strike the nations that don't go up to keep the festival of Sukkot. Verse 19. This will be Egypt's punishment, and the punishment of all the nations that don't go up to keep the festival of Sukkot.
Thanks. So, we'll keep that other verse in a minute.
Wow.
Finally, everyone remaining from all the nations that come to attack Jerusalem. So this is after the Great Tribulation, this is after the war, this is after Messiah has set himself up as king and destroyed all those enemies.
So he's ruling and reigning.
They will come up every year for Sukkot. If they don't, then there's no rain for them. So the nations are going to come up and celebrate at least Sukkot. What happens at Sukkot? There is an offering given, remember? We talked about there's a first fruits. In fact, the official offering at Sukkot is the bread that's made from your grains. So you grow your grain, you actually then make something of it, you make something with your hands and it becomes bread, and then you produce that offering at Sukkot. So there is still an offering that even the nations are going to give at Sukkot. I'm not talking about us as grafted in, I'm talking about the nations who have made it
That's right.
through to the end after the tribulation, after the war.
Sounds like a tribute. Like that, it's
Right.
after the war, like
Yeah.
as the captive sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right, that's true then. Wow.
So, what about us Messianic believers who are grafted into the nation of Israel? Let's have a look at Isaiah 56, 6 to 8.
Wow.
I've got it.
Thanks.
Um,
Thanks for volunteering again.
And the foreigners who join themselves to Adonai, to serve him, to love the name of Adonai, these workers, all who keep Shabbat and do not profane it, and hold fast to my covenant, I will bring them to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices be accepted on my altar, my house be called a house of prayer for all peoples. What was it, 680? Adonai Elohim says, He who gathers Israel's exiles, there are yet others I will gather besides those gathering.
So, do you think we, as those who are also gathered together with the exiles, will be bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices?
Very much so, yes.
Yes.
I think that's part of the Messianic kingdom. We will be partaking in the burnt offerings. We will be partaking in the sacrifices. Now, when I say sacrifices, it doesn't necessarily mean animal sacrifices. There is actually a debate in Judaism where some believe that there will be no more animal sacrifices. There'll only be fruit, plant, and vegetables, and the labour of your hands.
Yeah.
And there are others that say there will be burnt offerings and sacrifices. Rabbi Shapiro says the one sacrifice that won't happen is the sin offering, because that's been dealt with. But we won't really know until we get there. We just know that there's going to be burnt offerings and sacrifices according to the scriptures. So, what does that mean for us? Well, we often talk about the Messianic kingdom being now. We're already living in the Messianic kingdom. Is that right? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. So we've sort of partly in it, partly not. So we are legally exempt from all these laws, but who of us wants to be living the kingdom now, the kingdom of the future now? So what I'm trying to say is there's some good grounds for us to be starting to practice some of these things, because we will do them in the Messianic kingdom. And if we want to live the kingdom now, then there's good grounds for us to be actually starting some of these principles of tithing, not the first fruits, but our tithing and terumah. So, to do that, and as I said, this is not a hit you up for money, this is how you do this practically, okay? As a believer, how can you apply this? The simple rule that we have been taught in the past, and it's not a bad rule to be generous by. 1/3 goes to the ministry that feeds you into your local fellowship. 1/3 of your pay goes to charity to support the poor, and 1/3 of your pay goes towards doing aliyah. So you're actually funding yourself going to Israel, which is what you're meant to do with the first, second, fourth, and fifth tithe. The second tithe is meant to be brought to Israel and celebrated there. So this is not exactly to those rules, but the point is you're putting money aside every third pay packet. You put your 10th aside into an account, and then when you've got enough, you go up to Israel and you do aliyah. Some of us probably can do it once a year. Some of us can probably do it once every 10 years. But that doesn't matter. The whole point is you're saving up towards that, so you can do aliyah. Right, let's be a bit more biblical, because remember the commandments broke it down into first tithe, second tithe, and all that sort of stuff. So this is another way of looking at it. The terumah, which is, as I said, somewhere between 1.6 and 2% of your pay packet, or 2.5 if you've got a good eye, goes towards the teacher or prophet or the ministry that feeds you. Every first tithe, or 10% of your pay packet, should go towards the priest. There is no priest, so where can you get the air conditioning? suddenly gone quiet here. I know it's
I'm enjoying the
quiet and hot. So it's really up to you what you do with that 10%, that first tithe. The second tithe, the second 10% of your pay packet, you then put towards Aliyah. So that's now actually taking 20% out of your pay packet, which is quite a chunk. But that's what the Jews did. And I think a lot of them still do these days with their finances. So we think we have 90%, but the Jews actually only have 78% of their pay packet to live with, because they still follow these rules. And then every second 10%, the second 10% every 6 years goes towards the charity. So in effect, there's less money going to charity than in the simple rule, but there's more money going towards you doing Aliyah, and there's more money going towards the priest, whoever that is. And I'm not saying that I'm the priest, okay? So I'm not saying you should give your 10% here. It's really up to you how you want to do that. If you want to keep it and save it for when the temple is established, that's great. I'm happy for that. You'll have a big wad of money to bring into the kingdom. So I think that's it. No, I just put it in a pie chart. I hope Judith would be here because she likes pie charts.
Oh, no. She'd be so happy right now.
Actually, I realise now that's not quite right, because once you take 2% away, you've only got 98%, and that should be 10% of the 98%, and that should be 10% of the 78%. But anyway, my maths wasn't there this morning. Whatever I'm talking about, though, is it's really something that you need to be led to do. There's no obligation here. We'll love you, we'll accept you, we'll have fellowship with you, regardless of whether you tithe, give it to Terumah, or don't even give it to Terumah. It's not an obligation to be doing that in this fellowship, but I think once a year it's important that we do teach biblical tithing and how it's actually done and how it will be done in the future. So I've done my part, and next year you might hear from me again on the same subject, but probably a different message. Right. We going to have a cup of coffee? Yeah. Or did you want to do something?
Do you have a song? What song do you have? Depends.
We do have a song.
Is it a new one?
That's the new one.
Oh, even if you're just sitting and listening.
Yeah.